All right, let's talk about a few other basic parameters. The first one is normally you should have a global volume for the entire synthesizer. Probably doesn't need a whole lot of explanation. Velocity. Velocity basically, if you hit a key hard or soft, that it sounds harder or softer, as far as, coming out the speakers of the file. So adjustments of this down or up affects how much that is affected by how hard you hit the key. Meaning that if you turn this all the way up, that, when you hit the key, that it's just, no matter how hard or soft you hit it, it's going to sound the same volume level. And way down, depending on how they have the velocity set up to where that you've got it way down to where if you hit the key real soft, that it sounds real soft. If you hit it real in the middle or real hard, that it sounds like that. And is very descriptive of that. So that's pretty easy to understand. The other thing is polyphony or mono. Poly, basically you're dealing with, is able to play more than one note. So you're able to play two or more notes together. And then mono is basically only being able to play one note at a time. So if you hit one note, as soon as you start to hit another note, the previous note's going to get disconnected, so only one note can sound at a time. And most times, glide is basically, it's almost like a slide between the notes. So if you hit like one note and then you go to hit another note, that there'll be a certain rate of change, like it'll go a smooth slide in frequency from that note to the next note. It'll go down, down, something like that. And basically the glide, for the most part, is going to have parameters to adjust that concept, and it's very simple. Number of voices. Normally the number of voices is dealing with, when you're talking about polyphony is that how many voices you're able to hit at one time. Can you hit only 3 notes at one time, 4 notes, 8 notes, 16 notes, 32 notes, anything like that? And sometimes this one has a quality. So, I mean, in that, if it has something like that on there, it might be very specific to the actual synthesizer, and you're going to want to look into what that's doing. And the other thing is, we wanted to talk about the noise parameter. The noise parameter, it basically, more than likely, is going to have it's going to have either some type of a noise file, a pink noise, a white noise. It might have some other type of a noise file in it, and the amount of it. You're going to have a level on it, maybe a panning of it, and color. Color would be, it really depends, and you really have to look at the individual synthesizer and the paperwork that comes, the descriptive paperwork with it, to understand exactly what that's doing, because you're not really sure that it's adding two different types of noises, a pink and a white noise together, if it's compressing it, what all it might be doing to add noise. But if you go back and watch the videos that I had done on noise and distortion, that you'll have a pretty good understanding that what's entailed in that parameter. But those are some of the just other basic parameters that are probably fairly necessary and parts of your synthesizer, basic parts of them. So basically what we're going to look at now is some aspects of some synthesizers that might not be basics and might be very particular to certain synthesizers, and we're going to address a few of them. All right, well, the next thing we want to talk about is routing. Some synthesizers do this differently. On this synthesizer, that the routing's set up here, and it's got an on-off switch for it, so that you can choose different things to route to other things. So, the understanding of that and how they might route. I mean, they can be routed in all kinds of different ways. So I'm not going to really address that, but basically we talked a little bit about that so far. And the routing complexities can be complex, but if you take it just one step at a time, and whatever synthesizer you're working at, working with, take a close look at how it's routing different things. And we have talked about using low frequency oscillators on your oscilloscope, or your envelopes on your filter and things like that. And those are routing issues, signal flow and routing issues. So without getting into that too deep, that, that routing issue of how things are connected to a specific synthesizer and how that they're connected, that you just need to look at that. I don't want to get into that too much. We might a little bit here when we start doing some sound sculpting, but I just basically wanted to address that so that you understand when you're looking at some synthesizer and you're talking about some of the things I've talked about, that somewhere on there, there's more than likely some kind of system to route things from one place to another, without making it, complex. That way that, the basic understanding that we had talked about and how to get that done, how to route those things, so that, the same concept is when you're looking at some synthesizers got wires connected to it all over the dang place. And it looks like Ma Bell on acid or something, and you're going, my God, and they're routing, routing systems to route things to other things to get them to work together. And sometimes those routings can be very simplified, and sometimes those routings can be very, very complex. And so you really just need to sit down with whatever type of synthesizer you're planning on working with, and really sit down with the routing of that synthesizer, and and really sit down and understand what that means, so that you can understand that it's basically changing the signal flow. It's adding paths to your signal flow so that your signal flow is changing direction, and connecting things. And that simple understanding of basically, and taking that one piece at a time, whatever's going to be connected to something else, and then it's going to be connected to something else, and it might be connected to a couple different things, or it might be connected to 4 different things, or 4 things connected to it, that basic understanding of the routing, so that when you're seeing some kind of synthesizer and somebody's talking to you about those things and you're not following, it's because they might be real familiar with that synthesizer and the routing that's happening, and you're looking at it, like I showed you at the beginning of this series of some synthesizer wires all over the place, and you're thinking, my God, that's complicated. But, if you understand the routing of the synthesizer, first of all, and you understand, the signal flow that's set up in the synthesizer, and you understand some of the routing capabilities that have been incorporated in the synthesizer to change that signal flow and approach it from that way. Because I don't know how much we're going to get into that, because I am not making a video to where we're going to sit down with one of those synths that I showed you that look like Ma Bell on acid. We're not going there, okay? So, if you're that much into it and you want to mess with that kind of stuff and get that complex, that's great. I suggest at first that you work with some basic synthesizers. Basic synthesizers like this one that's called Mai Tai, that'll have some fairly simple routing procedures to where, you get into the actual manual and it will explain to you, how those things are routed together and how you can connect them together so that you can use this LFO on this and on this thing. You can use it on this. You can use it on this at the same time. How they can connect together and how the system is. But, at first, I suggest you worry about just basic routings and working with basic synthesis at first. Later on, once you understand that kind of stuff, the biggest thing to understand about that is as you start to sculpt sound, you're going to come to some point to where that's what you want to do. And, some people use very basic synthesis to do things they want to do. Some people use very complex synthesis. And so as they start to grow in their capabilities of using these tools, that they start looking for other routing techniques, other things connect things, other cool tools that might work together with what's happening. But it's a progressive thing, most of the time, they don't just go get one of those synths, that looks like Ma Bell on acid and then just start sticking things together, because they, work on the basic concepts of sound first, and that's why I said at the beginning of the video, going to basic concepts of synthesizers and then routing concepts of connecting those things together and having different aspects of the synthesizer work together with other aspects of the synthesizer or other modules. And as you get better at using that you'll see some of those things where you're going to need to expand your routing. You're going to want to do other things to make things happen. Or you'll get to a point you don't really want to. You're not that into it, and you go to a sampler and you're like, no, I got a sampler. I get sounds that are pretty basic what I want. I sound sculpt on them, and then I do some basic stuff to them, and then I might work on them a little bit more after I've sound sculpted them in the sampler. It really depends on how much you're going to use that. So, that routing thing, you basically want to approach like that. And if you approach it from a simple synthesizer and start working on some of the basic routings of connecting them, as you get better and as you decide that your level of that you are a sound sculptor, then you might get into some really complex routings. But, we're not, that's about as far as I'm taking that right now. So, with that, we're basically done at looking the last of the basic parameters there, that on some people might see some of the basic parameters or other things happening in the synth. But for me, we've tried to address just the basics of the synthesizer for producing sound. And now we're going to look at a few more complex things that can be on some other synthesizer. So, I hope I didn't, the routing thing, I suggest you get some synthesizers and you really look at the routing. And because it can be very complex, it can be very simple to do simple things, and it can be very complex for really complex things. And those routings are really going to depend on your understanding of sound, how well you understand sound, and what things are happening in natural sounds or unnatural sounds. And, to make those kind of things happening by connecting different things together. And that is going to develop with your understanding of sound and sound sculpting with a synthesizer. And it's that simple. So try to keep it that simple and take baby steps, into the Ma Bell, that looks like on acid, so that you don't get frustrated. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the series so far. Next, we're going to look at some other parameters that may be on the synthesizers that, that may not be just basic parameters and synthesis concepts that we've talked about. Peace, hope, love. See you in the next video.